Shabbat Shalom. Our weekly Torah portion is a bit of an anniversary for me, as it was a little under a decade ago that I stood at my very first pulpit and delivered the second sermon of my career. It was Jerusalem and the Hebrew Union College, and I was a first-year rabbinical student. And that week, just like this week, it was Parshat Tatzriya Metzora, which, as Bella expertly mentioned, is the most challenging section of our Torah. And I was talking about these ideas of things being clean and unclean, fit and unfit. And the year that I lived that year in Israel was a particularly tumultuous time between Jews. The Israeli police were actively arresting women who were praying with the women of the wall at the Kotel. And there was no equal protection for liberal Jews and Orthodox Jews alike in this dispute. The Kotel Compromise, the agreement which would create an egalitarian section of the Western Wall, did not exist, and there was a sense of injustice in the air, a sense that the state was not living up to its sworn promise to protect and be a home for all Jews of all nations. And in that milieu, in that feeling, I crafted a sermon around the comparison of the experience of proud liberal Jews in a state for the Jews that was not making room for them as they were. And I argued then that when we were simply involved in the day-to-day affairs of life, the whole, the mundane, liberal Jews in Israel were essentially invisible. But the moment that we came too close to the sacred, it was as if a contagion had bloomed on us, as if a skin eruption had taken place, and all of a sudden, nothing would save us from being inspected and critiqued and judged. And it was as if we were filled with sarat, deeply unclean, just for the desire, the simple desire to express our love for God and Judaism and the state of Israel in a way that was different from the powers that be. And perhaps you think that I consider this to be a bit of an anniversary because it was one of my first sermons. But no, it became an anniversary for me because of what happened immediately afterwards. My friends, they all shook my hand and said, Yashar Koach, and my teachers told me, we'll see you tomorrow for sermon review. And then a man who was sitting in the community came up to me. And he was a genteel older gentleman who, unlike everyone else in the very casual Israeli synagogue, was dressed in a full suit and tie. And I could not quite place his accent. It was somewhere between English and European and impeccably clipped. And he said something to me along the lines of, I liked your sermon, so please send me a copy of it as I do a little bit of writing for an editorial column, and I would like to talk about it. And this was the very first time someone had ever complimented me this way. And I was very honored. And I said, oh, yes, my pleasure. What's your email? Oh, and what's your name? And that is how I met Rabbi Dov Marmer. And for those of you who are visiting us today, or who are perhaps still new to our community and do not know that name, Rabbi Marmer was our senior rabbi for nearly 20 years and served as our emeritus until his death just last year. He was a pillar of Canadian Judaism, a staunch lover and supporter of the state of Israel, and a fearless speaker of often hard truth. Just as it was nearly a decade ago, now is another challenging time between the Jewish people. It is a challenging time for those of us who love Israel, but don't love the policies of its current government. And of course, it is also a particularly charged time on our Jewish calendar as we stand this Shabbat between the remembrance of the Holocaust, Yom HaShoah, our memorial for Israel's fallen, Yom HaZikaron, and our celebration, Yom HaAtzmaut, of Israel's miraculous independence. And so it is in this current situation that I am trying to draw upon the legacy of Rabbi Marmer and the other great rabbinic luminaries of my studies who could talk about Israel, both its incredible potential as well as its very real flaws and challenges, and they did so with grace, and they did so with nuance, and they did so with love. And so this Shabbat, I want to deliver two very clear messages, two very important messages as we enter into this week and these important days. And the first is that, just as I mentioned a moment before, I do genuinely believe that Israel's independence and that its existence is miraculous. As a people, we existed for thousands of years without the ability to determine our fate. We were powerless and dependent on tolerance and acceptance from other nations for the very right to live, the very right to dwell, the very chance to be. The story of my ancestors in Europe was one of living in a land that was not ours, and sometimes the king was kind, and sometimes he was not, but there was never a doubt that one day we would be forced to leave once more. And even in North America, der Golden Medina, the golden nation, there was still generational trauma and fear and anxiety that one day we would be forced to another land, and where we did not know. So it cannot be overstated that within the lifetime of people in this room, within the lifetime of my grandparents, that this has changed, and it has fundamentally changed for the better. When Daniel Hartman was here with us just a few months ago, he mentioned that it is very romantic to be powerless, because then you can always dream of what you would do if only you were the one with the power. But he said, it is so much better to have power, to have the power to determine your own fate, even if you don't know where you are going. Power to protect the people that you love, even if that means sometimes you have to fight. And power to make mistakes, as long as you continue to attempt to correct them. Powerlessness and power are both seductive, said the rabbi. But he would choose power even if it meant there was a chance he would use it wrong any day, over the ethical certainty of powerlessness. We were exiles, and we were wanderers, and we were searchers for 2,000 years. And today, as a people, for the first time in 2 millennia, we have a nation, and we have a home, and we have power independent of any other person and any other faith and any other group. And it is not perfect, but it is still miraculous. And it is worthy of thanksgiving. It is worthy of celebration. And on Tuesday night, on Yom HaAtzmaut, we will celebrate the miraculous gift of the state of Israel. And just as we did this last Thursday night, when we were assembled as a Greater Toronto community led by our cantors and our cantorial soloists in honor of Israel's 75th birthday, we will raise our voices in song and sing Hatikva, and we will express the miraculous fulfillment of a 2,000-year dream to be a free people, to be free in our land. A miracle. And if that is my first message, then this is my second, that the story is not over. The story is not over yet. In the Babylonian Talmud, Ketubot 111a, our rabbis imagine God extracting the famous 3 oaths from the Jewish people. And the first oath was that the Jewish people could not, of their own free will, forcefully return to the land of Israel. We could not go up as a wall. We could not, as a great majority of people, return home as a cohesive unit. And the rabbis of the Talmud said that we would need to wait for God to bring the Jewish people home. And when would that happen? And they answered, at the end of time, at the end of days, when the Messiah comes, that's when we will come home. And with this text, amongst others, ringing in their ears, our people lived for nearly 1,500 years believing that when the Jews returned to Israel, when we would finally have freedom and independence again, it would also be the end of the world. It would be the end of the story. And that our coming home, our freedom, would be happily ever after. And the book would shut. And you didn't really have to consider what would happen afterwards, because that was part of the great mystery. Who knows what will happen after the end of the world? But here we are, a free people now, in our land and in many others too. And the Messiah is not here. And the world has not ended. And contrary to public belief, and contrary to what we expected perhaps, we are still writing our own story. And it's quite an amazing thing, this, to seize the power which has been denied you for 2,000 years, and then to take that power and rewrite your own story so that you are not happily ever after, but one more living chapter in the grand tale of our people. And that is what we have done. And it's a little scary. We have no guidebook for this moment. There's no instruction manual for how to ingather your exiles after 2,000 years. Amazon isn't selling Skipping the Coming of the Messiah for Dummies. And this means that mistakes are going to be made, and challenges will need to be overcome, and that internal strife and divisiveness will need to be worked through. We are writing our story. And that means that we, as a great Jewish people, we cannot check out and disassociate. We cannot give up after a painful election and say, well, that's it, I guess. I'm done with Israel. We can never take the existence of the Jewish state for granted, because it is truly miraculous. It is the fulfillment of our 2,000 years of longing. And since we are also writing our story, it's also not responsible for us to say to any and all critique, keep your mouth shut. She's perfect. Because as miraculous as she is, the state of Israel, the one that we have, as the prayer we just said mentions, is only the first flowering of our redemption. There is still work to be done to ensure that this chapter of our Jewish story, the one that we are writing, is one of triumph and faith, redemption and healing for the world. For if we do not maintain the highest level of expectations for her, if we do not hold her up to a standard that is not just fair, but exceptional, how will she ever fulfill her destiny? How will she ever be Or LaGoyim, the light to the nations? Rabbi Marmer made Aliyah to Israel after his retirement as our senior rabbi, which is how I met him for the very first time. And he wrote a regular column in the Canadian Jewish News about his experiences and his perspectives and what he was learning and what he was seeing. And he did it with unwavering love and unflinching honesty. And nearly a decade ago, it was my honor to contribute to that column with his perspective on one of my very first sermons. And today, speaking from the same bima that he preached many times, on the same subject that he spoke many times on, our beloved Israel, I join my prayer to his, a prayer that I feel still hovers in this sanctuary, that she will always live up to her great and holy purpose. In the next few weeks, there will be many ways to celebrate with Israel as she honors her 75th birthday. There will be parties and films, panels and concerts. And it is my most sincere hope that you will engage with Israel in many ways during the season, and that it will inspire you so that you see her miracles, and that it will push you so that we can continue to write the next great chapter of our collective story together. Shabbat Shalom. It's my honor now to invite a member of our Board of Overseers, Richard Toker, to offer greetings and announcements from our board.